guys, welcome back. This is Matt Chat number 99, featuring part 2 of my interview with Apogee founder and 3D Realms founder, Mr. Scott Miller. Now this is the episode I'm sure you've been waiting for. We talk about how you get hooked up with John Romero and John Carmack. We talk about the original Duke Nukem. We talk about Rise of the Triad, and yes, we talk about Duke Nukem 3D and what Scott thinks about the upcoming Duke Nukem Forever. What the heck took him so long to create this long anticipated game? It's a story that I know you want to hear. So, without further ado, here is Mr. Scott Miller. Now, you mentioned how you got in touch with John Romero of at Softdisk, and I know this is a really good story about how you got in touch with him. So, would you mind sharing that story?
Yeah, just basically the story is that I had done some work with Softdisk. I knew what kind of militant organization they were. I knew that they read all the fan mail and everything. So I saw that Softdisk was releasing some games that were done by John Romero, like a game called Dangerous Dave. And when I saw that game, I thought, this would be perfect for my Apogee model, which is, releasing episodes and so on, like I'd done with Kingdom of Cross and so on. So I wanted to get in touch with him and convince him that he could probably make more money doing what I'm doing than what he's doing. But I had to be really stealthy about it. So what I did is I wrote a fan letter to him saying, I really enjoyed Dangerous Dave, but I found a bug. If you contact me, I'll tell you where the bug is. And I was really trying to stick a carrot out there for him to contact me. And when I didn't hear from him for a few weeks, I sent him another fan letter saying, hey, and I was using different names. Anyway, after about 3 or 4 letters, he had these pinned up on his wall, apparently, as fan letters. He had no intention of responding until he noticed, oh my God, they're all coming from the same address. And so he got really mad. He wrote me this really nasty letter saying, what kind of crazy person are you sending all these letters with different names but from the same address and everything? Anyway, so that got him to contact me, and I was able to contact, and he put his phone number in there, right? He says, call me. I want to talk to you about this. So I called him, and I was like, hey, John, here's why I did that. I needed to talk to you about another business opportunity for you, and I knew that Softdisk would filter these letters away from you if I called you about a business opportunity. And so I explained the whole shareware thing to him, and I tell you, him and John Carmack at the time were in complete disbelief that shareware could have any chance of success. But I said, I'm making this kind of money, and look, I'm just doing text games. You guys are doing actual VGA graphics games. Imagine what you could do. So they finally decided to take a flyer and make Commander Keen, but only if I paid them the development cost up front, which basically emptied out my whole bank account. So I paid them. Took them 6 months to write a game. They brought Tom Hall on as an artist and also the story designer and everything. And when we released that game, it blew away anything my cross games were doing. I mean, it was making like $30,000 a month. And so they quickly became believers in the shareware system. And, within 6 months, they had quit their Softdisk jobs and set up a new company, did software, and, the rest is history.
Now, you were focusing on PC games at a very early time. And, we were talking before the interview about how you'd actually had a Commodore PET and all these Commodore computers, including the Amiga. How did you know to focus on the PC?
Well, I mean, the PC at the time, this was, 1990, in that area, 1991. It was the biggest platform. Maybe not the best platform for games, but it was the biggest one. And, we had no chance at that time to release anything for the Nintendo or the Sega or the console markets, because those guys would laugh at what we were doing at the time. Our games were very small scale and so on. So it wasn't anything that they would be interested in. So the PC was the platform to do. It was an open platform. It was easy to work with, and it was just the obvious platform to use. So at the time, it was a no-brainer.
All right, so when you first started to see these 3D games from Carmack and Romero, Catacombs and Hover Tank, did you instantly realize this was going to be a really big thing?
I was incredibly impressed by what John was doing with these games, and yeah, I approached them almost immediately and said, "Look, we need you guys are doing this for your Softdisk stuff, and they were trying to wind down things. They had a sort of an agreement with Softdisk to do like 6 more games with them. So they were trying to fulfill that commitment, and I said, look, you know, this would just be an explosive success if we could release something like this as shareware. And they were like, well, we have 1 more game. Actually, they said they have 2 more games that as a commitment they have to do to Softdisk before they can do something for Apogee. And I said, look, let's do a trade here. Let Apogee do one of your games for Softdisk. And we actually did that. We did a game called Scuba Venture, which is released as an id Software game, but in actual fact, it was done by Apogee. It's like a little side-scrolling game with a little scuba diver and you're shooting sharks and crap like that. It's a really crappy game. But while we were making that game for Softdisk, they started making Wolfenstein for us. And so that's really how Wolfenstein got made. Was you know, we were able to steer them. We were able to fulfill a 1 game commitment for Softdisk for them, and that allowed them time to make Wolfenstein for us, and worked out really well. Wolfenstein was like another leap in sales. You know, that game, you know, where Commander Keen was making like $30,000 a month. You know, Wolfenstein was making sometimes $300,000 a month for us, and so it just completely changed the scope of everything. You know, both companies at that point started to grow and hire people and think big and everything. And that's kind of when we started thinking, well, let's build our own independent team and start working on Duke Nukem 3D and Rise of the Triad and other projects like that. So Wolfenstein kind of opened the doors for both companies to grow and take that next step to become much bigger and more serious game companies.
Rise of the Triad. Now, that's a game with a pretty interesting history. Now, it's my understanding is that game began as an expansion pack for Wolfenstein 3D. First of all, is that true? And second of all, what happened with there were some issues with Carmack about the upcoming Doom game. So could you sort of fill in that story a little bit?
Yeah, basically, after Wolfenstein, id Software started focusing on their next big 3D engine and big 3D game, which of course was Doom. And so my company made a proposal to id Software that said, look, let us keep making Wolfenstein games. We'll make a sequel to Wolfenstein. We'll call it Rise of the Triad. And you know, we had this whole story and they loved it and they approved it. And so we were making it for like 8 or 9 months. And it got to the point, though, to where, well, I'm not really sure why they changed their mind, but they basically, about 8 or 9 months into the development of Rise of the Triad, they basically called us up and canceled the agreement and said, you know, we decided that we don't want to see this game come out. And from what I could tell, they didn't want to see this game come out at the same time as Doom and kind of, you know, step on each other. They wanted Doom to be out there free and clear of any other competition. So anyway, so we had to agree to cancel the project, but we had all these assets, all these kind of military assets and everything, and we kind of kept the name Rise of the Triad, but just sort of remolded the story. And anyway, so that's kind of why Rise of the Triad is like this strange mix, because it had its genesis as a true sequel to Wolfenstein. Then we had to change it, and at that point, you know, we're stuck with all these assets, and you got to try and make it work with new assets that you know, don't represent Wolfenstein. So it was just a big mess that we had to somehow make it work. And you know, the game, you know, Rise of the Triad came out there and it did pretty well, but it would have done a lot better as a sequel to Wolfenstein, of course.
There's some speculation. I actually read this in a 2009 interview with you about some plans to make a contemporary reboot of this game. You know, what's the status on that?
Well, back in 2008, we licensed the name Apogee to another company, actually some friends of mine who used to work for us and so on, guys I really trust. They wanted to start up Apogee again, kind of bring back that label, and so they're about to release a Duke Nukem game, I think, called Critical Mass on the DS that should be coming out this summer probably. And they've also got the Rise of the Triad license, and they're looking at doing sort of a modern remake of that. So, those balls are in motion. They're going slowly as far as the Rise of the Triad game goes, but they do intend on bringing it out at some point, and hope it does well. Love to see it.
All right, so here's probably the question that everybody's been waiting for, right? The Duke Nukem 3D. I mean, this is the Duke. I mean, who hasn't heard of this guy, right? He's probably one of the most famous characters in at least PC gaming history. I was wondering, if you could just talk a little bit about the character, how he came about, and were there any influences on him, perhaps Bruce Campbell's portrayal in the Evil Dead series?
Mm-hmm. Funny, Bruce Campbell wasn't really that much of an influence, except for we did use a couple of his lines in the movie. Really, the influence was more like Arnold Schwarzenegger, Dirty Harry, and maybe even like a little bit of Captain Kirk, with the womanizing ways and so on. But Duke is kind of like an 80s action hero. He's kind of a throwback to that era. Where he doesn't apologize for what he does to get the mission done and so on like that. And so the idea with Duke was to create a character. It was always to create a character with some sort of personality. And the first two side-scrolling games couldn't really pull it off as well. But we really struck gold and did it right with Duke 3D, because by that time the technology allowed us to really bring Duke's personality to life. So I think that's kind of the secret of his success, is that he was the first shooter character, action character that really had a personality that came to life during the game. It wasn't just like during cutscenes or something. During the gameplay, Dirk's personality was there. He was saying things that maybe the player was thinking. And he just kind of somehow we struck lightning with that character, and it resonates with people, and it's just because he's a fun character. He's unapologetic. He gets the women, and he kicks butt, and he doesn't wear power armor. He's just out there. He's just himself, and he's out there, and he's always having a fun time. It seems like while he's doing it. So he's just a lovable character.
There's a lot of talk about the sort of the adult nature of the game as well, with the strippers and everything. Mm-hmm. And what was the talk behind the scenes about those strippers?
The strippers, if you go back to Duke 3D, the strippers were actually a pretty minor part in that game. It was sort of like a surprise in one of the early levels, and I think one of the later levels had it also. It wasn't that big a part of the game. People seem to remember it, though, because it's so out of the blue for a video game for its time. But the idea was, we purposely wanted to be controversial with that game. So that was one way to do it, was to have those kind of, and also with Duke 3D, unlike every shooter that came before, we wanted to have sort of real life locations like a cinema theater, strip club, bookstores, just all these. We had just a whole ton of locations that were sort of real life locations from LA. It's funny, our company had gone out to E3 in LA many times, and it's George Broussard, one of the leaders of the Duke Nukem project. He's about going to strip clubs and stuff and having some fun. So it was just kind of a natural extension for a strip club to appear in the game, and it's just one of those things that we knew it would be kind of controversial, and it just sort of rung the right bells with people. And it's funny how people remember that in the game, especially younger kids. Were like, for them it was almost like, whoa, I can't believe that this is in here. But it wasn't that big of a deal. It's not like you were seeing anything truly nude, but it just it struck a nerve with people. And so yeah, it's in Duke Forever, and I think people expect it, and I don't know, it's just part of who Duke is now.
Don't have time to play with myself.
Did you catch any flack about it from parent groups or anything?
You know, not a whole lot. Most guys who played the game, they're not going to complain. And hardly any women, I think, played the game. So, I mean, we got some letters, but you know, the game was rated M, and what you saw in the game was probably didn't even deserve an M rating. So, it was appropriately rated. There was really no reason to complain.
Well, I mean, given the popularity of this character, I mean, it's really not surprising that there's so much anticipation about the Duke Nukem Forever project. But, you know, as you know, of course, this is a game that seems like it's been in development for a long time. I actually read a quip about how it was titled, it should be titled Duke Nukem Forever in development. So,
right.
Well, why is it taking so long?
It's a matter that, the issue is that after Duke 3D came out, there's several issues involved here. First off, unfortunately, as a company, we were too much of a perfectionist. And that was okay in the 90s, but once you started getting past the 90s, when team sizes started to get way too big and budgets started getting way too big, there wasn't that much room for perfectionism. You basically had to shoot for something less than perfect. But we continued to try and really make a game that was too ambitious. And on top of that, after we left the 90s, team sizes began to really grow huge. And, you know, Duke Nukem 3D, that was made with a team size on average of about 8 people. It grew to like 12, 13 people near the end, but for the most of the development, it was like around 8 people. That game only cost us about $300,000 to make. So it was a very, you know, inexpensive game to make. And we self-funded Duke 3D, and our plan was to self-fund Duke Forever. That way we'd have full control over it and not have a publisher breathing down our back and everything. And so we self-funded Duke Forever. But unfortunately, self-funding a game kind of, you know, means we have to be careful with our money and so on. And so we never did really grow the team to the proper size. You know, it needed to grow to like 40 people practically, but we were always around 20, 25 people for the most part. And so for our team, it was always kind of playing catch up. We were always like behind other games when they came out, you know, so new games would come out with newer technology and stuff. And it was like, well, crap, you know, we can't come out with Duke Forever, you know, with lesser technology than these games. So we were always trying to play catch up, and we were always dealing with undersized teams, and we didn't get any funding from our publisher. You know, had we got funding from our publisher, then we could have really ramped up our team size. And in fact, at the very end of the project, we decided to bite the bullet and ramp up our team to like 35 people. And finally, things was getting done. The game should have been out last year. It would have been out last year had we got funding from our publisher, but they still turned us down as far as helping us. So now the game's coming out a year after it should, but it's finally come out, so everyone's happy. But it was just that we were an undersized company because we were self-funded, and also we were striving for too much perfection. And that was a lethal combination. We finally kind of were getting over the hill with things, but it was like, it was too late. When we really needed the publisher to step up with funding, they wouldn't do it. So we had to basically, you know, we were basically out of our own money. So we had to basically scale down the company, and anyway, here we are.
Well, this the Duke Nukem Forever that is about to come out, is that the game that you wanted it to be?
Essentially, it is. It's pretty much 95% the game we intended to make. You know, after the company sort of disbanded, we helped fund a smaller group of people, about 10 developers, to continue development of the game, and they essentially completed the PC version of the game. And then we made the deal with Gearbox to take that completed PC game, polish it up a little bit, but mostly what Gearbox is doing is they're working with external teams to help manage the development of the ports, for the PS3 and the Xbox, and also manage the external development of the multiplayer. So, and that's all. And our publisher is actually funding the development now that Gearbox has it in their hands. I guess they trusted Gearbox more than they did us to get the game done. So finally, the publisher stepped up to help fund the game, and so now it's able to get done like it should have been done like a year ago. But essentially, the game is the game that 3D Realms was making. So what you see is really a 3D Realms game, and I think people will be happy with it. It has that 3D Realms touch, just like the original Duke Nukem 3D.
And that's all for this week's episode. I hope you guys enjoyed that. I'll be back next week with the third and final part of my interview with Mr. Scott Miller. We still have some games and other topics to cover, so stay tuned for that. I want to also thank everyone who has been donating to the show. I've been able to keep the old drinking horn here filled with some rather excellent brew. As a matter of fact, when I'm done today, I'll be enjoying this Arrogant Bastard Ale brewed in Escondia, San Diego County, California. Let's just hope I don't become what I drink. Also want to mention that Rise of the Triad and the Duke Nukem games, the 3D ones anyway, are available on GOG.com, GOG.com. And as you know, I have a partnership with them, and I'll post some links to them. So if you want to buy those games and use those links, then I'll get a small kickback, and it won't cost you anything extra. So by all means, use those links. Now the quotation for this week comes from one of the true computing pioneers, Mr. Howard Hathaway Aiken. He designed IBM's Mark I computer. He's got a great quotation. It goes something like this: "Don't worry about people stealing your ideas. If your ideas are any good, you'll have to shove them down people's throats." Howard must have been quite a guy. See you next week.
Damn, that was annoying.